Sure. So I think probably the key things I'm looking for are context and clarity. I think people often suffer from a curse of knowledge when it comes to completing awards entries. So they have a full and complete understanding of the work they've done and the impact it's had. But of course, as judges, we don't. Like, we're coming to this completely cold. We know nothing about your client. We know nothing about the project or the work that you've undertaken. And as such, the award entry needs to concisely communicate everything we need to know about the work you've done and the results that were achieved. I think it's also worth noting that when I'm scoring awards, I'm looking to give you points. So we award a score for each section of the entry. And as such, incomplete sections or areas where you failed to provide the requisite information, those areas really cost you dearly in terms of points and can really hurt your chances of winning. So I would also encourage people to just make sure they complete each section as fully as they can. Steve, do you have some thoughts?
Yeah, I do. Thanks, Hannah. Fit the brief. Hannah, I think has said that very nicely. We see plenty of award entries, and just coming back to the point on context, when we've got an agency or an entrant entering across a load of different categories, they don't change the entry to fit the actual category they're going for, and they don't think whether or not the content they're adding in actually belongs in the section. It does. I think also when we're talking about context, the vast majority of the awards have something in them about challenges you've faced. And we see very, very often, because COVID, because skills gap and things like that, context goes a really, really long way. I think non-fluffy metrics, an idea of what's really going on in your business, an idea about what's really going on with the people that are in your business, makes a complete entry. So I'd say context and completeness. You only have a certain amount of space to be able to make your point, and that point needs to be easily defended and easily justifiable. Paris, anything from you on this?
Yes, absolutely. So both Hannah and Steve have made some really good points. If I would add three things from my end, the first thing would be that it needs to be unique and it needs to stand out. So really think about what you're putting in there. Be very selective. So perhaps write it first and edit until you get to the key points. Second would be to make sure that you have proof points and data that backs up your objectives, and that's absolutely crucial. The third one, I would say that it needs to resonate somehow. It needs to connect with the audience reading it. And those are the 3 points I would add.
Cool. I think for me, the thing I'm mainly looking for are concrete, measurable objectives. So I like objectives that say things like increase revenue from a number to a different number, probably a bigger number. I feel like we often see some quite fluffy stuff in this section. And I'm very much of the school of thought that it's not really an objective if you can't measure it. So really measurable objectives are very important for me. I also want to see a full budget breakdown. And the place where I feel like people often go wrong with this are when in-house teams are applying for awards. Often in-house teams neglect to include things like staffing costs for their work. And you don't work for free if you work in an in-house team. There is a cost to having you work for the business, and there will be a cost to the business, therefore, of your work on this project. It's an area we don't seem to see quite so many problems with when we look at it from an agency perspective, because agencies are kind of used to billing their time, but I think in-house teams often don't. So yeah, that's what I'm looking for. Steve, do you have anything to add?
All of that. I think the issue that we see with the objective section more often than not is it's neither one thing or the other. It's either very dry, very specific metrics, the kind of thing that Hannah wants to see, and I think that all the judges want to see, or something incredibly airy-fairy about the value proposition behind it and nothing else. Some of the best entries I've seen are a really good mixture of both. This is the story that we're looking to tell. This is the project. These are the various steps of the project broken down, and this is how much it's cost us to get there. That kind of thing really, really makes an entry stand out. Even I think in some of them, when you get down into the later sections where they're maybe not as strong as you'd want, having that as your kind of North Star really, really makes you stand out from the crowd, in my view. Paris, anything from you?
Yes, absolutely. I think the objective part is really the framework for your entry. That's the part that you really need to nail to hook us as the judges reading through your entry. And one tip that I could offer is to use SMART objectives. So it is what the other judges have already mentioned. So make sure that you are being specific, make sure that you are being relevant and measurable, and follow the SMART objective framework. When it comes to budget, I'm looking for transparency as well. And Hannah already mentioned about when in-house team, for example, sometimes don't include the staff cost. Likewise, I've noticed with agencies sometimes don't have the full breakdown because they can't share that information, which I completely understand. However, you need to put something in that area. So just basically putting that you don't have that information is not good enough. Just having the ballpark figure and having the detail that you can provide just beefs up the entry a bit more and gives it the information we need to assess it properly for this part of the application.
Like what I'm looking for is very simple, just like a sensible breakdown line by line of the costs. So that might include things like staffing costs, production costs, if your project incurred some sort of production costs, any media costs, if your entry involves kind of media costs. And really what I'm looking for is actual pound or dollar or currency amounts here.
So the lawyer in me would say there will be plenty of agreements with clients that will say you can't tell anybody anything about your relationship with us. And you can't tell us anything about the commercial terms through which your services are delivered. But I think Hannah's got a really, really good point here. If you haven't had the discussion with your stakeholder as to whether or not you can give us this detail, it's very, very, very difficult to judge these things objectively. More often than not, in my experience, it's just there will be something in agreements that say we can use information for creds and stuff like that, and that's a little bit more high level. But as Hannah says, if you are really expecting to win this, we really need to know why we need to give this award to you. And it's one thing to say, well, we're a huge brand and we threw 10 million at a project and we got 5 likes out of it, aren't we great? That's just not going to move the needle. Paris may have a more charitable take on this than the pair of us, but
I'm not sure if I do, to be honest. I am nodding in agreement because we are talking about a winning entry, and I absolutely agree with you. That information needs to be included. I think me coming from an agency background where you work with clients, and sometimes it takes time before you get that information. But like Steve said, it is important to make sure that you have got all stakeholders involved, so you have the necessary information to enter a winning award.
I'm really just looking for clarity of thought here. So I like to see that both a clear target audience has been identified and that the high-level strategy that's been executed is connected to reaching that audience. I feel like sometimes the strategy seems weirdly disconnected. So I'll often see an entry where they have identified a target audience, but then the activity they've undertaken seems to bear little or no relation to actually reaching that audience. So really, that's what I'm looking for there. Steve?
I'm looking for, this is where I do get harsh. Clarity of thought is one thing, originality of thought is something else entirely. I think we see a lot of entries that are very well delivered, but being really nasty about it because it's Friday morning and it's grey. You just look at it and think, yeah, that's a job delivered well. Is it a job well enough to be recognised against everybody else in the category? I think is another issue altogether. You know, if you identify an audience and go for it, great. But what learning did you manage to generate along the way? What insights have you then been able to feed back into this or other projects? It's that kind of thing. You know, it's one thing just to say, well, this is what everybody else would do, but I don't think that's what we're looking for. I think we're looking for real innovative thinking here. So Paris may have a bit more of a charitable take than me. She may tell me otherwise. Paris?
Not sure. I can see a trend here of me being the charitable one. I'm not sure if I am. I would say with the strategy aspect, what I'm really looking for is a strategy there, because many times I've noticed that there's a whole list of tactics and no real strategy. So if, that's an area, again, I would say just make sure that you are clear on the strategy, make sure that it's connected to the objectives as well. And I would also say sometimes less is more. And what I mean with that is that sometimes when we're going through the entries, I've noticed that the strategy part can be just really rambling and really long. So if you're to the point, and you are connected to the objectives and you have a clear strategy, you would be standing out far more than many of the entries. So just taking that advice would help.
For me, I'm hoping to see an appropriate level of detail about what was actually implemented. So this is a key section where I feel like curse of knowledge sometimes comes into play. Often I'll read this section of an award entry, but I'll feel like I'm still not sure what activity was actually undertaken. So what was actually done? What did the project actually look like? What did you actually do? So for me, like it sounds a bit obvious, but I actually want to know what you implemented as clearly and concisely as possible. Creativity, I would acknowledge, is a tricky thing to kind of put your finger on, right? What do we mean by creative? It means different things to different people. For me personally, I guess what I like to see is a novel or unexpected idea, approach, or methodology. So I would, I think that for some types of awards, it's easier to demonstrate creativity than for others. And I would acknowledge that. But I think you can be creative in a number of ways. You can be creative in the way you execute. You could be creative in the way that you've targeted and reached your audience. You can be creative in your methodology. So there are a number of ways you can demonstrate creativity. Try and find a way to demonstrate creativity in a way that's kind of like relevant to your award entry, is what I'd advise. Steve?
Creativity is more than we wrote quite a good blog post as part of a campaign. Creativity, I think, is a holistic thing. Implementation really tells its own story. And as Hannah says, you need to know what has actually been done. But creativity can be a combination of different approaches. You know, it doesn't mean that you have to completely reinvent the wheel. But we do need to see something more than, okay, we had a target audience, we implemented it, and it did okay, that's it. Creativity still counts even when the results aren't quite what you expect. We had an entry in the last several awards where actually a campaign led to a loss in revenue for at least 1 month, but then the reasons why were really clear and the approach to it sort of suggested that it was much more of a long tail exercise. So yeah, I mean, creativity doesn't necessarily mean shiny. It means, again, it's a phrase we used before, but it means innovation. How about you, Paris?
Yeah, I agree. Creativity for me means innovation as well. And I think where it might be helpful for you writing the award entry is to think about, why do you think this is innovative, or why do you think this is creative, and focus on that why, because essentially this is your opportunity to explain to the judges. So use that why rather than just saying something was creative. That's actually one of my favorite sections, not because I enjoy seeing people face challenges. It's more because that's the area where I feel like many people open up and start to just explain about why they perhaps entered. And it's just an area that I feel that I am able to connect with the entries more. What I'm generally looking for is not just what the challenge was, but how they overcame the challenge. And so I know this was mentioned earlier on in the webinar as well, that during lockdown, for example, we had COVID being mentioned a lot as the challenge, and it was a challenge indeed for many people. And even though we were getting that same challenge over and over again, what stood out was the entries that were able to effectively explain how they overcame that challenge and still delivered success for the campaign they entered. Over to you, Steve.
I couldn't agree more. This I would love this to be one of my favorite sections, and it always turns out to be the one that makes me the most angry for all of the reasons. Well, because I should get out more, but for all the reasons Paris identifies. You know, we see the same things every time because COVID and working from home. You know, we have a challenge in knitting teams together. Okay, you do. How did you actually then do that? The ones that make much more of an impact with me are a technical challenge or something happening in the midst of what you're doing that forces you to pivot, and how you pivot out of it to then maintain your success or even build on what you've got to. You know, generic challenges, I just don't think make enough of a difference here. And it always tends to be a category that I mark down. And it's a real shame because, as Paris has rightly said, this is the kind of section that gives you a real insight into the work that you're doing and the business that you are. And it's that kind of insight that really does move the needle when you're looking at these entries. How about you, Hannah?
Yeah, I definitely agree. What I'm really looking for here, well, two things. One, honesty. I think sometimes this prompts a sort of response, and I don't think they do this anymore in job interviews. But back in the day when I went to the job interviews, they used to ask you like what your weaknesses were. And what you would always do is provide this really jammy answer, which essentially you're like, oh, my weakness is just that I'm really good at stuff. And yeah, and essentially we were trying to dress up weaknesses as strengths. And I think that often what happens in this section is I see like either it's not really a challenge at all, or like they're telling me about it only to kind of show off. And I'm just like, it kind of gives me the ick. So what I want here is honesty. I want honest answers. What went wrong? Something always goes wrong. I've been in agency land for more than 15 years, and I can't think of a single project or a single thing that I've ever done for a client which didn't go wrong at one point. So tell me what actually went wrong and what you actually did to fix it. The other thing I'm really keen to see, and I think this speaks to both what Paris and Steve have said, is like, what were the challenges unique to this project? COVID is not a challenge that was unique to this project. Remote work is not a challenge that was unique to this project. What is particularly challenging about this client in this market? And what kind of steps did you have to take to overcome this? I would agree with Steve. This is typically my lowest scoring section. And I think it's because people do struggle with it. I do think this stuff is hard to talk about, but I would really encourage people just to be very, very honest here and tell us about what really happened. It's cool. We get it. So yeah, that's what I'd like to hear.
Right. So again, we've talked about how other parts of the entry really bring them to life. This is the coda on the song that you're looking to sing, which is a terrible analogy, but it's early. And an entry that says this would mean the world to us, or we have won all these other awards. Why don't you give us this one as well? Just don't convince me, and I doubt they convince anybody else. That's marking the entry either. Why should you win? Because we fulfilled our objectives, we did something differently, we were innovative. And if you want to talk about the effect that it's had, if it's had a transformational effect on the business and your client's business as part of a partnership, then that's the kind of thing I think that does win these entries. But just as you've been specific everywhere else, you've got to be specific here. That to me is the big thing. Why should you win objectively, as opposed to because you want to, because it'd be great. We know it would be great, and we want people to feel that way about it, because that's the whole point of the awards. But it needs to be measurable. It needs to be smart. How about you, Paris?
Yeah, you've nailed that one. Definitely agree. That's the part where you need to bring the whole award together and explain why, and that why needs to focus on the objectives and the results. Don't know if you've got anything else to add on, Hannah.
When I'm scoring this part of the entry, I'll often find myself thinking, like, this is great work, but is it award winning? So for me, whilst results are important, ultimately executing an effective campaign in terms of ROI or however you're measuring this isn't enough in and of itself to make it a winner. So in my view, like, if you've just done a good campaign that got good results, that's just doing your job. Like, that to me doesn't necessarily mean that you're an award winner. So really what I'm looking for here is something beyond looking at just how effective your work is. So I'm looking to understand like what you think you've done that's new or different in some way. Again, I'm looking for like a novel or unexpected idea, approach, or methodology. And I would definitely concur that unhappily, often what I see here sort of bland statements like it would mean so much to the team to have their work recognised. And don't get me wrong, I understand that, but that's not a reason for me to award you a winner. Like, it would make the team happy. Not really a reason.
I think in terms of supporting documents, entrants do need to remember that space is limited in the entry for a reason. And the supporting documents don't give you the opportunity to make your point in way more detail or in many, many, many different ways. Like any good project, it shouldn't take 10 clicks for you to be able to make your point. It needs to bring the point that you're making in the entry itself to life. Because unfortunately, whether or not anybody likes it, judges are time poor. They want to make sure they've done the best they can. They want to make sure they've taken the relevant information into account when they're making their judgment. So just because you can file supporting documents doesn't mean that they can be endless, and doesn't mean that they should then work to dilute the entry that you're making, unless Paris thinks differently.
I really don't. I was nodding completely in agreement, and yes, completely agree. There's a reason why. And there's the award entry, and you have got specific areas to make your point, and having the additional document doesn't mean that that's an area for you to add more information. If I would add one thing in there, would be that with supporting documents, often when I open them, I'm looking for something visual. And not more text. I would also say try not to put too many links. Sometimes there are links signposted to YouTube, for example. And so try to just keep to that document. So and think about the experience for the judges going from the different documents. And obviously make sure that the files are not too big, because we download all the files and we have to be able to see them. And if we can't open them, then we won't look through them. So just make sure that you think about small things like that. Hannah, I don't know if you've got anything to add.
Yeah, I think really for me, I'm just looking for evidence to support whatever you've claimed within your entry. So if you've claimed that you got 200 pieces of press coverage, I want to see your coverage report with the 200 pieces of press coverage. If you've claimed an uplift in traffic or rankings, I want to see a report that reflects this. And, you know, like if you don't give me that report, like how am I supposed to evaluate you? So really that's ultimately what I'm looking for in terms of supporting documents. Just as like a personal, like honestly, I feel like I've started seeing more of this as time's gone on. I often see in supported documents like a sizzle reel, so some sort of link to a YouTube video which explains the whole campaign. I'm not going to watch that. So like it's fine for you to create promotional videos to showcase your work for other types of activity, but for me, like this is not it. This is not it. I'm not going to sit through your sizzle reel. Everything needs to be in the entry, and the supporting documents should just really be there as evidence to support whatever you've claimed in terms of results.
So the supporting documents are just an extra when I'm looking through the entry. Most of the weight is put on the actual entry. If the entry doesn't have the information on objectives and implementations and the areas, then the additional documents are not going to help it. It's just an extra. If I would say again that we've mentioned before, that less is more on when it comes to the documents, because everything that needs to be included for the award should be included in the main entry form. Hannah, anything else you want to add in?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I would concur. Like, I don't put any weight on supporting documents at all. The only way in which I put weight on them is when there aren't any. So, like I said before, supporting documentation for me is there to support whatever you're claiming in terms of results. So, if you don't provide me supporting documentation to back up your claims, what you're most likely to see is an impact in your score for the results and evaluation section, because we need to score awards fairly. Like, we can't just believe that you're claiming whatever you're claiming. We need evidence to support those claims. So if you make claims, but you've no documentation to back up the results, then really you've left us with little choice but to knock off points here, because you've not provided us with substantial evidence to kind of back this. So yeah, Steve? Am I being harsh? Steve's giggling at me.
No, it's a great lawyer. It's a great lawyer's answer. I just say that the supporting documents are sizzle; they're not the steak. You know, we've seen plenty of entries that can make many of the points you make in supporting documents within the space that you have, whether that's through infographics or the way you present results. There really shouldn't be a reason to turn this into War and Peace. You know, there's a long-held cliche that there's nobody worse marketing themselves than marketers. And the clarity of thought and the ability to make your point concisely is hugely important. I think, as Hannah rightly says, bad supporting documents can undermine the point you're trying to make in the main entry. So I would just think about them as carefully as you do every other point. It's not just an exercise in throwing mud at a wall and seeing what sticks. Again, this is a really difficult section for a lot of people. I think because it becomes an exercise in heart over head. You know, we're great people. Everybody works together. It's fine. But wait, but certainly if we're talking about a rising star, why are you rising? what difference have you made within the business? Is it all potential, or is it something that you've achieved right now? And the same within the team as well. By all means, talk about the fact that you've got a holistic approach, that everybody in the team gets involved in the project. That's all great to hear. But then what difference does that make? What uplift does that make in results? It sounds awful. And some of these entries are designed to celebrate people over product, if you like. But the product's got to be there. This can't just be someone who, or a team of people that make the office a happier place to be. That's great. But is that relevant to the entry that you're putting in? I think it'd be the point I make. I feel really harsh now, and I'm sure Hannah's going to tell me why I'm wrong.
I'm not going to tell you why you're wrong. I'm going to be even harsher, I'm afraid.
Yay!
So yeah, I'm looking for three things here, regardless of whether it's an agency award, a team award, or a rising star. I want to see three things. I want to see great business results. So documented business results. So new client wins, client retention, agency billing growth, great business results. If this is somebody working client side, these are like actual concrete things. I want to see that. I also want to see great work examples that are both effective and innovative. So that might be actual campaign work, or it might be kind of stuff that's more like process driven. So we could have effective and innovative processes which have been implemented by people, that kind of thing. So yeah, so I want to see great business results, great work examples. And then finally, and actually most importantly, I want to see evidence of one or more of the following. Internal initiatives. So commitment to building a great workplace culture. So, and what that is, not just this person has built a great workplace culture or this agency has a great workplace culture. I want to know what that actually is. I want to know examples of processes. I want to see how you progress people. What benefits do you offer? What training do you offer? Actually, concrete examples of internal initiatives. And I also love to see external initiatives that make a positive impact to the industry or more broadly to society. So I want to see things like community initiatives, mentorship, work with charitable organizations. Again, I actually want to see more than great business results and more than great work. Because if you're doing like great things for your business and great work, that's brilliant, but you're just doing your job. I want to know what you do beyond just doing your job. And similarly, as an agency or an in-house team, I want to know what you're doing beyond just like being a great team. What are you doing outside of that? Paris, any more thoughts?
Yes, yeah, I would echo what you said about results. Absolutely crucial to focus on results. That's the part that will stand out for me. What is it you've achieved that you've want highlighted in this award? So focus on the results. I would also add experience. Don't shy away from talking about your experiences, whether that is for Rising Star or for Best Agency. And when you're talking about experiences, that could be the clients, the type of campaigns, it could be past experiences. Add in the experiences, so it just really builds up a rich picture of who you are as an individual or as a collective. Lastly, I would just echo what Hannah said about collaborations as well, and I think that's really important to show the collaborations not just within your teams but also externally. What is it you're doing to build communities, or what is it that you're doing that's different from other agencies that could stand out, that is making a difference.
Love to. Make your entry like a pitch, and each pitch is different. You're going to have to convince the judges that it's a good thing to give you the award in the first place. Don't be complacent, I think, is number two. We do see a lot of entries who enter very often, and very often it's good to see them because it means they're engaging with the event. But that doesn't mean you can recycle the same wording every time when it comes to background and things like that. You do have to approach this differently every time. Equally, If you're submitting multiple entries across multiple categories, those entries need to be different there as well. You know, you can't enter a best agency award and then best innovative use of code and have them read the same way. It's just not going to land. I think head over heart, as we talked about previously, we need to see metrics, we need to see numbers as much as we need to see emotion, pride, and values. All of them are great, but they all have to work together. And I think for new entries, just get an entry in, because the exercise of doing an entry, I think, teaches you a lot about yourself and gets you used to the kind of issues that we're talking about today, and helps you get that recognition to drive yourself forward. That's my 5. Hannah, how about you?
Oh, yeah. So I feel like my advice would be the same, honestly, whether you are a returning entrant or entering for the very first time. I've said it before, but I think it bears repeating. Complete all sections fully.
Yeah.
We award 10 points for every section. If you don't complete each section, you're kind of losing points straight off the bat. Now, I feel like it's worth clarifying. We score entries, but then we discuss them as a team of judges. And it's not always the case that the highest scoring entry wins. So like, we do use some judgment here, but I've definitely seen instances where I think entrants have inadvertently put themselves out of the competition because they haven't completed all the sections fully, and therefore the award is just, the entry is virtually impossible to score fairly. The second thing I would encourage you to do is to make sure any objectives you state are concrete and measurable, and include a budget breakdown with actual pounds or dollar figures. Again, we've said this before, but I think it bears repeating. There is absolutely no reason why you shouldn't score 10 out of 10 points for this objectives and budget section, and yet people rarely do. So just get this right. Thirdly, make sure your results and evaluation section directly relates back to whatever you stated in the objectives and budget section. It's wild to me the number of entries I read where they have concrete objectives, and then in the results section, the results they tell me about bear no relation to the supposed objectives of the activity at all. So again, if you do that, you're going to lose points. So make sure that these things speak to each other. Please provide supporting evidence to back up any results you're claiming to have achieved. Otherwise, again, we're going to struggle to score you fairly. Finally, I would really strongly recommend that you get somebody who wasn't involved in the project or campaign to read your entry and then sit down and talk to them about it. Sit down and talk to them about what they found confusing about the entry, what detail they felt was missing. Where they felt that, like, perhaps you were relying very heavily on jargon and the entry had become impenetrable. So get somebody completely outside of the process, and even outside of your agency if you can, just to read your entry and just talk to you about it. Because I do think that this curse of knowledge thing is real. And I do genuinely have a lot of sympathy. I am one of the people that Steve has referenced. It wasn't my whole job to write awards entries. That would have been a gorgeous job and very, very easy. But I did, before I was a judge, spend an awful lot of time writing awards entries. And some of them, when I came back and read them, I was like, oh, wow, like, why did I write that? That makes absolutely no sense at all. All right, very clearly, I haven't given the judges enough to go on there. So yeah, please, please, please get somebody who wasn't involved in the project or campaign to actually review your entry with you and talk to you about like what makes sense and what doesn't. Paris, what are your tips?
Yeah, so I've got 5 tips that could be helpful both for people that have entered before and complete new entrants. So number 1 would be to please use the template provided. Do not send in a PDF, even though you think it looks better with the visuals examples. Yes, it's great to have the visual examples, but use the template. We look through many entries, and when you have a majority following the template and then suddenly you get a PDF that's just not following the same details, it is one that I find confusing. And if I'm confused, then I'm not understanding your points, and that might affect the scoring I am applying. So please use the template provided. The second one, I would say, is to please make sure that you're using a font that you can read. So number 12 is usual normal font size. I have had many entries where in order to get more text into the entry, the font size has been very, very small, and sometimes highlighted in red. And I would say just keep it simple. Just keep it to a font size of 12 and follow the formatting of the application. The third one has been mentioned before by the fellow judges, and that's to just make sure that you create entry for each category. So don't copy and paste, because there are specific areas that where you need to explain that category in particular, and that part does not resonate at all when it's copy and pasted. And this happens more times than can imagine. So please don't copy and paste. The fourth one would be to think about your key points. Make sure that you have got at least 3 key points. And for me, less is more here. And I think we live in a time where we have got many different metrics, and with some award categories like social media and SEO, I would say there's so many different metrics, and the key points can go left, right, and center, and again that creates confusion. So go for simplicity and keep to a couple of key points. I would say 3. The fifth and final one I would say is to just make sure that you have data to back any points that you make have to be backed up with data. Those are the 5 key points I would say.